name is Ken Clark, and I'm the editor-in-chief of Hardware and Building Supply Dealer. And with us today for our one-on-one video series is Gina Schaefer, who not only is the owner of a dozen or so very cool hardware stores in Washington, D.C. and surrounding area, not only is she an inspirational and well sought after public speaker, she's an award-winning retailer, and above all that, she is the author of a recently published Recovery Hardware by Gina Schaefer. We'll talk about that in a minute. Gina, say hello to our audience, please.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me, Ken. This is really exciting.
I think when you're introduced, 3 bullet points should be mentioned. 1, born in a small town in Northeast Ohio.
Yes.
And during the course of your primary and secondary education, your family hosted 9 foreign exchange students.
That's correct.
Can you give us a quick comment about that and how that?
Yeah. Sorry, 5 were Brazilian. And so now I speak Portuguese now because I've had the chance to spend some time in Brazil, which is really exciting. 1 is in the British Foreign Service, and he's retiring this year. And he's actually come to visit me twice in the last 6 months. And so that's also very cool. Those are relationships that have lasted decades.
Let's go to the second bullet point. In college at Wittenberg.
Yeah.
College football players quaked in their cleats as you ordered them around to various community service programs. Is that true? Can you comment on that?
That is absolutely true. I was one of the student coordinators of a volunteer requirement for graduation, and one of my tasks was to instruct the football team on how and why they should do community service. And I have a lot of friends still from those days that laugh about me trying to boss them around. Yes.
Number 3 on my list of bullet points, I think our viewers might consider it the most interesting of all. One day you said to yourself, I think I'm going to open a hardware store. And the rest is history. Tell us about that decision.
I lived in a neighborhood that had been destroyed by the riots when Martin Luther King was assassinated. A lot of people have heard that story from me, and I was a tech reject. I was recently at the time laid off for the 3rd time from a tech job, and I decided it was time to open my own business. And I wanted something that was tangible, and what is more practical and tangible than hardware? And I lived in a neighborhood that desperately needed any kind of business, especially a hardware store. So I did it.
Can you imagine thinking that you'll soon have, or not soon, but in a few years, have more than a dozen and 250 employees in a multi-million-dollar business?
I like to think that I imagined all of that, but I absolutely did not. I don't know what I thought at the time, to be honest. I mean, I was serving my growing community from this little tiny storefront in a building that had probably no business being a hardware store, and I was loving every second of it. I didn't have time to think about the future. I was too busy focused on what I didn't know in the present.
Well, let's talk just a little bit about Recovery Hardware. We have a copy of it here. I saw you speak at a recent Pro Dealer Industry Summit, and we showed a little video of your practice of allowing second chances, bringing folks in from who are suffering from drug addiction, giving them a chance, giving people a second chance. And do you remember what you said when that video ended? I'll tell you what you said. You said, makes me cry every time.
Yeah.
And you weren't the only person crying in the audience, because I was there going like this and all that. So tell us a little bit about Recovery Hardware and the theme.
Yeah. So I was really fortunate to be down the street, my first store down the street from a recovery clinic that's really well known in Washington, D.C. And long story short, some of my very first teammates were in that recovery program. They walked in and asked me for a job. I said yes. The rest is history. We became known in the community as a place where you could come and get back on your feet. And it became a sort of an underground part of our culture that honestly we didn't nurture on purpose. And about 12 years in, one of my teammates came to me and he said, the community calls this place Recovery Hardware. That's when I cried, Ken. As you know, maybe already, there's a chapter in the book called There Are No Tears in Hardware, and we have cried a lot. So that chapter is very misnamed. So I decided that it was a great title for a book. People had been asking me to write a book for a while. And then I had a teammate who I knew was going to pass away. And he wanted me to tell his story as well as the stories of others on my team. So I had no choice. I had to do what he told me.
Well, I think it's a very positive story, though, in the end, when you
Yeah,
all things considered. And thank you for sharing it.
thank you.
The back of the book includes some excellent questions for anyone who's interviewing you. They could just pick up the book and look here and say, "Lessons from resilient employees." Tell us about. You got a great story about the grade A college grad who comes in and turns out to be not such a good employee vis-a-vis someone who may have spent time in recovery. Tell us about that.
Well, there's a lot of stereotypes when it comes to interviewing and hiring folks. We look at someone on paper, and for whatever reason, we think that they're automatically a great candidate or automatically a bad candidate. And the story that you're referring to was a young man who came to work for me, whose parents owned a business. He was from the Midwest. He was a college graduate, very articulate. No one would have looked at his resume, looked at him on paper, and said, "Wow, this guy he's going to do something bad." But every time I would talk to a customer or a friend about someone we had hired out of prison or someone in recovery, immediately their negativity antennas would go up and they'd say, "How do you trust that person?" Well, to circle back then to the kid who looked great on paper, he stole thousands of dollars from us before we caught him. And it was a really good lesson for me as a young business owner. I needed to make sure that we eliminated the stereotyping, we eliminated the preconceived notions. And that is really hard for humans to do. We probably still get it wrong, half the time. But that was a good lesson for me as a new business owner.
Another bullet point on the back of your book is an interesting phrase: how to put bravery back into your business. Where did that expression come from?
Well, I mean, I think it speaks to the same thing: trusting people, letting go. I couldn't, we opened one store a year for 10 years. We were fast and furious. I didn't have time to stop and think about what we were, whether I should have had time or not, what we were screwing up that maybe we needed to fix. And so a little bit of it is, just building trust into your life and letting go.
What was it like to write a book?
Oh, it was so fun and so exhausting. I worked with this really great editor in New York who used to tell me that if she had a red pen that she wrote with, I'd get a big fat F some days, because I would tell these stories, and in my brain they were fantastic, and I was talking about my teammates and telling stories of their resilience, but I never infused myself. And she said, you are kind of writing a memoir. How did it make you feel? And I think in this particular case, it was really good to talk about, I had a teammate of 10 years who started using drugs again. And that was devastating for me. And I hadn't written that aspect into it. So I would say the book was probably 90% interviews, storytelling, and 10 to 15% of reflection. How have these experiences shaped me as an owner? How did they make me feel in that moment that maybe I have moved beyond, sugar-coated, glossed over, whatever it is? My glass is always filled to the top, and I don't dwell on negative things in the past or things that could be perceived as. So writing the book was a lot of memories.
Now, Washington, D.C., fascinating city to visit. Must be a fascinating city to conduct a business.
Yes.
Not a lot of parking, they say, but you got a lot of great foot traffic.
Yes.
Tell me your thought about the urban hardware store and what's the key to success in your opinion.
I think the future of hardware stores is really intertwined with neighborhoods. What does the main street look like in your small town or in your suburb or in your rural area? And that is no different than what it should look like or could feel like in the city. We might not have parking lots like they do in the suburbs, but we have community members or neighborhoods that have a main street that needs vibrancy and excitement. And I think that hardware stores play such a big role in making sure that safety and vibrancy lasts. And then we have the added nuances of things like no parking and no loading docks and no storage and multi-level stores. I mean, we layer on some complexity that I think we've just gotten used to as an organization. But I think that across the country, hardware stores play such a strong part of making sure that our communities remain vibrant and just safe.
Well, excellent. You've got a great story. Is there any way to succinctly sum up kind of one of the key messages of recovery hardware?
Yeah, I think that the message for me is that you can learn how to be a leader from unconventional places. And that's really what I set out to document. All of the things that I have learned or ways that I have grown as a leader that I've learned from an unusual source. And by that, I mean, most people would not start a conversation by saying, my first employee was in prison for 17 years and he taught me X, Y, and Z. But that's truly what I think has helped make me a better leader. And so I think that's the theme of the book.
Well, Gina Schaefer, you're the CEO of a few cool hardware stores in and around Washington, D.C. You're the author of Recovery Hardware, which I suppose people can get where they get most of their books.
Yeah, I mean, I would love people to order it from their local bookstore or bookshop.org, but most people can find books where they most easily can.
Shop local is one of the other messages I imagine you
Yes, it is.
promote.
Yeah.
The name of the book again is Recovery Hardware, a nuts and bolts story about building a business, restoring a community, and renovating lives. Well, thank you very much for joining us. And viewers, thank you very much for sticking around to the end. Gina, thanks so much.
Thanks, Ken. I appreciate it. Thank you.